Hello and welcome to road.cc. Last week I was lucky enough to head out to the Peak District and preview some of the new route for the Eroica Britannia. Now, for those of you unfamiliar with l'Eroica, it began in the Tuscan region of Italy 21 years ago and is a true celebration of cycling vintage. In 2018 there were events in the USA, Spain, Uruguay and here in Britain, where it's took place in Derbyshire since 2013. L'Eroica is also pretty unique because it actually spawned a pro event, the Strade Bianche. Whereas these things usually happen the other way round with amateur versions of pro races and so forth, that's been happening since 2007. It's a UCI World Tour pro race and is pretty prestigious. It's been won 3 times by none other than Fabian Cancellara. The Eroica Britannia event itself is a pretty non-competitive sportive. There's 100 mile, 55 mile or 30 mile options. There's plenty of elevation and it's a mix of gravel and tarmac, which all in all it's pretty tough and definitely not for the faint-hearted. Not only that, but there's a big old catch. Your bike has to be pre-1987. So that means down tube shifters only, that means toe clips, that means rickety old handlebars with pretty much little to no grip, and that means painfully skinny tyres considering the treacherous terrain that the Eroica has run over. And of course, retro kit is highly encouraged. The event retains a festival feel and takes place over 3 days. There's loads of music and things to see in the event village, and en route you can indulge in the local Derbyshire delicacies such as the famous Bakewell pudding, and even have a cheeky beer or two at one of the feed stations, so we're told. So our test rides consisted of 2 days of riding. The first day we did almost the whole 55 mile route. For this we were on modern bikes. Now for this year, Eroica Britannia has just announced that alongside the classic rides with all the rules intact, there will also be the new Eroica Nova. This is an 80 mile ride where you can use any bike you like. So the thinking behind this is that I guess most cyclists nowadays don't actually have a pre-1987 bike or frame, which could actually end up being a bit of a barrier to entry. So this means you can join in on the weekend and not have to build up an old relic and make it capable of doing up to 100 miles on what are pretty treacherous roads. For the first day, I basically thought, well, if we're going to do modern versus retro, I might as well go as modern as I can get. So I opted for a Mason Definition 2 that I've just reviewed. It's got nice grippy 30mm tyres, hydraulic disc brakes, basically everything you'd want for a mixed terrain ride over the Peak District. For the vintage day, we rode a shorter and less gnarly route, which was especially welcomed by me. All of us on the trip were assigned a retro bike hired out by Andy's Vintage Bike Shed. Andy's based in Stoke-on-Trent and gave us a bit of history about all the bikes, one of which Chris Boardman actually rode at last year's Eroica Britannia. So each bike had a little bit of a story behind it. The bike I was riding was a handsome purple steel racer from Dave Quinn, who we didn't know a great deal about until my colleague Pat actually mentioned that he used to deal with him years ago. We know he had a bike shop in Chester under his own name and believe he now runs a shop called the Bike Factory in the same area. If you know any different though, do let us know in the comments because we're not entirely sure. The bike has lots of classic features like Reynolds 531 steel tubes, Wyman brakes, which I'm told are pretty sought after by hipsters in Shoreditch nowadays, and old school Mavic rims. I actually looked out with the tyres as I had 23 mils. Some of the others were on 19s, 20s, which was pretty horrendous on some of the more gravelly tracks we rode on. Probably the most intriguing feature was the Shimano BioPace chainrings. If you don't know about these, they're some of the first asymmetric oval rings launched by Shimano in 1983, I think it was. They're supposed to eliminate dead spots in your pedalling stroke and seemed like a good idea at the time, but they were quietly discontinued in the 90s as there wasn't really any evidence that they were any better. The bike was 7-speed and had 52/42 chain rings with a 28 cassette. So for me, being used to compacts and quite a lot of choice when it comes to gear ratios, I'm just perplexed as to why you'd have 52/42. After a bit of a wobbly start, I got used to the down tube shifting after a mile or so, but some of the bumpier sections were just savage. You feel every vibration. Bikes like this just weren't really built to ride in anything but fairly smooth tarmac, and I definitely felt every single jolt. As you'd expect, the braking was just nothing compared to the disc rotors I'm used to, even though they look nice, which I guess is what counts. Also, I just couldn't get used to how skinny the handlebars and brake hoods were, and my hands were killing me after about 20 minutes. I think I've definitely been spoiled with modern oversized handlebars and plush bar tape. I suppose though, although the ride experience was totally different on the retro bike, I did enjoy it a lot. It's just different, not necessarily much worse. Obviously, things like the brakes and the shifting aren't nearly as good, but when you're on a nice stretch of flat road, or even climbing after a while, it's just like riding a bike. So, what conclusions can I draw from this experience, if any? Well, first off, just hats off to all the hardy cyclists of an era before my time who were fiddling down by their knees to change gears all the time. And based off my experience, I'd have also probably have had permanent bruising on the inside of my palms from those skinny handlebars. And of course, chapeau to everyone who's conquered an Eroica, because based off the test rides we did on that couple of days, it's actually really bloody tough and definitely not to be sniffed at. It's a proper challenge. In terms of the comparisons between the retro and modern bike, well, obviously it's just not a fair test. The Quinn was an all-out racer in its day. Most of the all-season features of the Mason bike I was riding didn't really even exist pre-1987. I've already got myself signed up for the Eroica Britannia this summer, and have even pre-booked the Dave Quinn Purple Biopace Beauty from Andy, although I have asked him to stick a bit of extra bar tape on for me. As someone who got a pretty late start to road cycling, I've personally really enjoyed delving into cycling's history a little bit more. When I started riding seriously, you could pretty much already get 11-speed group sets, so I'm kind of learning about bikes backwards in a way. And I guess this is really the spirit of the Eroica events. It allows relative newbies like myself to learn a bit about the history of cycling, the fashion, the bikes of yesteryear, and for everyone else who was there at the time to celebrate a bygone era in cycling. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I also hope to see you at the Eroica Britannia in June for some retro fun. Thanks for watching this, and I'll see you next time.